Okay. Alright. We're back. My head was itching. So I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to watch the video, but like this. Just texting. Kidding. Okay. My dog ran underneath and was looking at me. When I looked down at her, she took off running. I pick on them all the time, so they just get so terrified that I'm going to do something. They're great. I love those girls. Okay, this was a request. How the Mamluks, I just heard this, Kris. How the Mamluks defend. English isn't my first language. How the Mamluks defended against the Mongols. I'm just going to go ahead and start that video and pretend like none of that happened.
For the second part of our series on how to defend against Mongol invasions, we turn to the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt. After their famous victory over the Mongols at Angelut in 1260, the Mamluks and Mongol Ilkhanate fought for another 60 years until a peace treaty in the 1320s. In all this time, the Mamluks only suffered one major defeat at Mongol hands. While a previous video of ours covered the chronology of the Mamluk-Mongol wars, here we focus on the means the Mamluk sultans used to defeat the Mongols tactically and strategically. Here's a good strategy to stop a cavalry army: put a tree in the way. Or loads. Let's get started on that and receive a special title at the same time, with our Spartans he would employ against the Mongols. Baybars and many of the Mamluks were Kipchaks, Turkic nomads, who lived in the Great Grass Steppe, which stretches from Ukraine through Kazakhstan. When the Mongols conquered those steppes in the 1230s, thousands of Kipchaks were displaced and sold abroad. Baybars and other boys like him were purchased by the Ayyubids of Egypt, descendants of the mighty Saladin. They were converted to Islam and trained to become fearsome soldiers on foot and horseback, equipped with the finest arms, armors and horses. Skilled with bow and mace, these slave soldiers, or Mamluks, became some of the greatest horseback warriors of the age. When the French king Louis IX and his army invaded Egypt on the 7th Crusade, at the Battle of Mansoura in 1250, 600 knights charged against the Mamluks. Only a handful of knights escaped alive. In the ensuing days, the Mamluks not only defeated the Crusader army and captured Louis IX, but murdered the last Ayyubid Sultan, beginning a long period of fighting between Mamluk factions for control of Cairo. Baybars and his own Mamluk regiments were forced to flee to the Ayyubids of Syria. There, Baybars urged the Ayyubid ruler, Al-Nasir Yusuf, to rally his forces against the approaching Mongol prince Hulagu. Al-Nasir chose instead to trust in the walls of Damascus and Aleppo. Baybars, who always had a clear head, knew the great army of Hulagu, which had taken Baghdad, would find no trouble picking off poorly led Ayyubid defenders. Thus Baybars abandoned the Ayyubids and made peace with his rival Qutuz, now the Sultan of Egypt. Al-Nasir shortly after abandoned his cities, and Syria swiftly fell to the Mongols in the spring of 1260. After that, there was no Islamic power in the region to stand against the Mongols, other than Cairo itself. Believing the Mamluks too disunited and weak, and not desiring to cross the desert in the heat of summer, Hulagu withdrew with most of his army to the cooler pastures of Azerbaijan. He sent letters to the Mamluks demanding their submission, and made it apparent that he would return in the autumn. Hulagu left his commander, Ketbuka, to consolidate Syria and Palestine, establishing a new government under a puppet Ayyubid prince named Al-Ashraf Musa. Contrary to some claims, Ketbuka was not in the midst of preparing to march on Egypt. He separated his forces into various local pastures to rest for the summer. Baybars and Qutuz could not let this opportunity slide. The emirs were terrified of the Mongols and believed them invincible. With difficulty, Qutuz and Baybars assembled a force commonly estimated at 10,000 Mamluks and a few thousand refugee soldiers who had fled the disintegration of Al-Nasir Yusuf's realm, including Turkmen, Kurds and Bedouin. The march was daring, and several times Baybars and Qutuz needed to rally the emirs into advancing. They caught Ketbukanoyan off guard, who had to quickly collect his forces from across the region. A corps of Mongols with Georgian, Armenian and local forces, with a large Syrian contingent under Al-Ashraf Musa, the prince the Mongols made titular head of Syria. Its exact size is uncertain, but likely similar to the Mamluk army. The two armies met in early September 1260 at Ain Jalut. It was ground well suited for cavalry, the backbone of both armies. Fighting began with skirmishing. Baybars led the Mamluk vanguard, a day's ride ahead of Qutuz, and was forced to fall back after the first day. On the 3rd of September, the full Mamluk army arrived and formed up. Different medieval sources emphasize different aspects. Mamluk accounts stress the early arrival of the Mongols, while the Ilkhanid sources describe a Mamluk ambush. Uniformly, they depict a hard-fought battle, with the Mongols pushing back the Mamluks and requiring Qutuz to reform his army twice lest it broke. 3 factors led to the ultimate Mamluk victory that day. While it's sometimes claimed the Mamluks defeated the Mongols through superior numbers or with gunpowder, neither seems borne out. Notices of these weapons at Ain Jalut come from later military treatises, which aim to glorify these weapons. Instead, Qutuz and Baybars' leadership preventing a Mamluk rout was key. But also commonly overlooked was the defection of Al-Ashraf Musa, an Ayyubid prince allied to the Mongols and stationed on their left flank. Either fearing the outcome of the battle or in agreement with the Mamluks, Al-Ashraf and his forces fled the field, allowing the Mongol army to be enveloped. And hence the third factor for the Mamluk victory was their superior armor, weapons and training for extended close-quarter combat. Thus, with some difficulty, the Mamluks cut down the Mongols and killed Ketbuka. Qutuz and Baybars pushed.
I saw the last video where they captured him. I didn't realize they Ketbuka. I knew the Muslims had captured him in that battle. I didn't realize they had killed him. Of course, it makes sense. I mean, what are you really going to keep him for? You can't use him to negotiate against or with the Mongols because it just seems like they don't care.
Qutuz and Baybars pushed the Mongols to the border and set about gaining the submission of regional princes, rewarding those like Al-Ashraf Musa or punishing those who had allied with the Mongols, while appointing a new governor for Syria. Qutuz was not long to enjoy his victory. Baybars assassinated him, revenge for Qutuz's murders of Baybars' allies. According to Baybars' chancellor and favoured biographer Ibn Abd al-Zahir, Baybars' own sword, rightly guided by Allah, struck down Qutuz. Baybars was enthroned as sultan and set about consolidating power. Ain Jalut hadn't broken Mongol military power. Baybars had gambled everything he had in order to defeat what was essentially a garrison, not the full Mongol army. He knew the Mongols would seek revenge in greater numbers. At the end of 1260, another small Mongol army attacked Syria, which was defeated handily at Homs in December, a much-needed boost to confirm the outcome of Ain Jalut. From his own experience and reports of other Mongol conquests, Baybars built his defense. Several factors were seen as key to the Mongols' victories. A disunited defense and too much trust in city walls gave the Mongols freedom of movement and local superiority of force. Detailed information networks were needed to track and prepare for Mongol advances. Diplomatically, the Mamluks needed friends and allies to relieve some of the pressure, while also maintaining their own internal lines of communication. In effect, to prevent the situation al-Nasir Yusuf had experienced. The Mamluks had to play to their strengths, particularly their strong core of heavy horsemen and the limited routes of advance, and deny the Mongols their own advantages, their mobility and numbers. Baybars was going to design his entire kingdom to counter Mongol invasions. Baybars was also extremely fortunate. When Hulagur learned of the death of his brother, Grand Khan Mungkur, he began to annex territories in Iran and the Caucasus that his northern cousins considered theirs, the soon-to-emerge Golden Horde. Their tax collectors had been stationed throughout these lands, and after Mungkur's death, Hulagur ousted them for himself. The ruler of the northern branch of the Mongols, Berke, was a Muslim who already disliked Hulagur for his murder of the Caliph. The annexation of lands he considered his own, coupled with the mysterious deaths of some of Berke's kinsmen in Hulagur's army, and without a great Khan to mediate between them, led to war breaking out between the two princes in 1262. Hulagur spent the remainder of his life at war with Berke of the Golden Horde, and when he died in 1265, his son Abaka took up the throne and continued the fighting. This provided Baybars valuable years to nurture his strength without any significant Mongol attacks. Baybars' first steps were securing the internal situation. Cities and principalities from Jordan through to Syria were subdued through force or treaty, while he incorporated the Bedouin Arabs of Syria into the defense, preventing them from allying with the Mongols. The governor of Syria, appointed by Qutuz, rebelled and declared himself Sultan, forcing Baybars to lead a campaign there to crush him and further consolidate his hold there. Baybars forced most of the Crusader settlements to accept treaties that protected his roots and allowed Baybars to reinforce Syria with soldiers and food supplies to overcome famine. The Crusader states were generally a minor annoyance, to fall at the Mamluks' leisure. Antioch fell to Baybars in 1268, Crac de Chevalier in 1271, and a slew of other Crusader sites by the end of his life. Given his lack of royal background and shaky claim to legitimacy, Baybars needed to reinforce his position in Cairo. To this end, he found a distant relation to the last Abbasid Caliph and quickly had him declared as a new Caliph in 1261. Inexplicably, he declared an attack on Baghdad with his new Caliph, marched as far as Damascus with him, and then sent the Caliph out with only some 400 men into Mongol lands. The result was the second Caliph was killed on Hulagur's order. What exactly Baybars hoped to achieve here confused even people at the time, and despite efforts to justify it, it seems Baybars simply made a rare misstep. But generally, Baybars was more effective. He focused strongly on control of information. With spies in the Ilkhanate, he wanted to know if a Mongol army was moving before even the Mongols knew it. His spies are alleged to have spread misinformation to destabilize the Ilkhanate at times. It was important to the Sultan to know immediately about Mongol movements and other news, and for this he established the Berit. Perhaps inspired by the Mongols' Yam postal system, this was a system of relay stations for messages to travel quickly right into the Sultan's hands. This was supported by signal towers, permanently manned with bonfires and smoke signals, as well as messenger pigeons, improved roads and bridges. At its height, a rider could travel from Egypt to Damascus in 3 days. He also refocused the fortifications of the region. When taking a Frankish or rebel city or castle, Baybars had its fortifications destroyed, while border fortresses, primarily along the Euphrates frontier with the Ilkhanate, like Al-Bira and Al-Rabba, were strengthened. Permanently garrisoned, these forts survived numerous failed Mongol assaults. There was also a strict system in place should the Mongols pass the border forts. As stated, Baybars wanted to prevent isolated garrisons from being picked off one by the Mongols, as had happened to the Khwarezmian Empire. Baybars' order was for garrisons to retreat to an agreed point, where they would mass up and face the Mongols in a unified body, or await the arrival of the Sultan and the main army. This strategy was employed in every major Mongol attack on Syria over the decades, and proved a most effective defensive measure. Baybars also made it customary to advance with his forces as soon as the news came of a Mongol attack. This generally served to frighten off smaller Mongol raiding parties, while also reminding the Syrian population that the Sultan would be there immediately to protect them or to punish defectors. And when smaller Mongol parties withdrew, Baybars could then raid over the border, particularly against the Ilkhan's allies in Armenian Cilicia. Baybars also improved the army, especially the Royal Mamluks, whose ranks he expanded and rewards heaped upon them, but also the Halka, the non-Mamluk lower status army. These were free men, native Egyptians, Kurds, Turkic auxiliaries, or the sons of Mamluks, who grew to dominate this body over the 14th century, and fill roles the prouder Mamluks refused to. The Mamluk garrisons in Cairo, particularly of the Berea, Mamluks to whom Baybars belonged, were reinforced, with hippodromes built in the city to train them, which also served to give entertainment to the population, while also reminding them of the Sultan's power. But Baybars also
Sorry, the air kicked on, so I had to mute the mic. I liked Baybar. I learned of him from the last video, but I don't like that he assassinated. I'm going to butcher the name.
But Baybars also had to expand the Mamluk regiments, and for this he needed steady access to Turkic slaves from the steppe. For this, Baybars made treaties and encouraged good ties with the Genoese and the newly restored Byzantine Empire under Michael VIII. The Genoese ferried the Kipchaks on their ships or sold them from the Crimean ports, and the Byzantines kept the Bosphorus open for their passage. But most importantly, Baybars needed the cooperation of the Mongols in the Golden Horde to allow this trade in the first place, or to stop them from harassing the Byzantines. This brings us to the alliance between Berke and Baybars. Upon learning of the war between the Golden Horde and Hulagur in 1262, Baybars sent a letter to Berke Khan through an Alan merchant. It stressed the Islam of both men and encouraged Berke's war against the Ilkhanate, but with no response from Berke. A more fruitful opportunity.
You know the old saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Well, those two are just waiting to meet up. Once I saw that guy's name, you were just like, yeah. Somehow Baybar is going to figure it out. And is it Baybars? Because in the last video on History March, it was Baibars. I mean, it doesn't matter. I'm not looking at it going, well, if they can't figure it out, to hell with him. You know, nothing like that.
He came later that year with a host of Mongol refugees. They were troops originally from the Golden Horde who had been provided to Hulagur for the campaign against the Nizari Ismailis and Baghdad, but were betrayed and attacked by Hulagur at the beginning of hostilities. Some fled to Afghanistan under their commander, some to the Golden Horde, and the rest to Egypt. Baybars quickly jumped on the opportunity. He welcomed them to Cairo with a glowing reception and made a great show of how well he treated these Mongols. Their leaders were made emirs, and the rest were incorporated into the Mamluk army. These were the first of the Wafidiyya, the Mongols who fought for the Mamluks. They were far from the last. Periodically, other Mongol refugees fleeing turmoil in the Ilkhanate, captured by the Mamluks after a victory, or sold as slaves during Mongol civil wars, ended up in Mamluk Egypt and incorporated into the army and elite. In time, some became the most powerful men in the Mamluk state. One, named ironically Ket Buka, even became sultan in the 1290s. The longest reigning Mamluk sultan, An-Nasir Muhammad, had a Mongolian mother, and Baybars himself took 3 Wafidiyya women as wives. They gave Baybars deeper knowledge of the Mongol army. In addition to his spies within the Ilkhanate, Baybars was likely among the most well-informed individuals on the Mongol military that there ever was, allowing him to further finesse his strategies. On the initial welcoming of Mongols into Egypt in late 1262, Baybars installed a new caliph, then sent another letter to Berke Khan, telling him of how he had so kindly treated Berke's soldiers. He urged Berke to take up jihad against Hulagur, and this time Berke responded kindly, kicking off a diplomatic relationship that would last another 2 centuries. So began the alliance between the Golden Horde and Mamluks, and while it never resulted in any military cooperation, it did keep access to Kipchak slaves open for the Mamluk army, despite some periods of cooler relations. Additionally, it unbalanced the Ilkhanate, which always feared a joint attack by the Mamluks and Golden Horde, a threat the Mamluks always encouraged. Preventing the Ilkhanate from massing all of its considerable strength on the Mamluks served Baybars's defences all the better. While Mamluk sources like to present this as a relationship of equal partners, with the Mamluk Sultan in a role as guardian of Islam and the religious senior, it's speculated that the Golden Horde saw this as a submission of the Mamluks to them. The Golden Horde Khans, as rulers of the Kipchak steppe and its peoples, may have seen it natural for the Kipchaks in Egypt to submit to them, made all the easier by their shared religion. For in Mongol imperial ideology, only the Chinggisids were legitimate rulers. Further, Mamluk embassies always bore a great number of expensive gifts for the Khan, while the Golden Horde rarely sent gifts in return, as it may have seen this as tribute. This is not just a modern observation. A later Mamluk scholar, Alaini, complained of how uneven the relationship was, and believed the Golden Horde had the better of it. By the time of his death in 1277, Baybars had created a system designed to negate Mongol military prowess. A strong army, well versed in Mongol attacks, was one thing, but in addition to this offensive weapon, Baybars had effectively prepared a lengthy defensive network too, while diplomatically preventing the Ilkhanate from focusing solely on the Mamluks militarily. And it is a testament to its ability that only on a single occasion did it fail, in 1300, when the Ilkhan Ghazan overcame the boy Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad at Wadi al-Khazandar. As a result, the Mamluks outlived the Ilkhanate by almost 2 centuries. Thanks again to our sponsor, Established.
Wow, Baybar really did a lot, didn't he? To kind of strengthen up alliances and the spies, all the information. Man. But, you know, something that you don't think about too much. To win a war is more than just the fighting. It's all the other stuff. And that's what he was focused on. Well, this is good. I'm going to go ahead and end it here. I'm going to jump into I got 2 more videos I'm going to do tonight. And then I'm done for the night. Yay! Okay. So like and subscribe. Give it a thumbs up. You have to. It's illegal now in some states and countries. I forgot sometimes I do more than... I only have 12% of my viewers are from the U.S. So sometimes I'll say stuff and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. 12% of my viewers are in the U.S. The rest around the world. Like 9% is from the U.K., Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan, and Indonesia, India, Egypt. They're all like the big ones. Canada. So sometimes I'll say stuff and then I'm like, oh yeah, they probably don't get that reference. Alright, I'm going to end it here. Until next time, you have a good day, have a good night.